Rob Harmon's weathered hands moved methodically along the hull of the Maria Catherine, his fingers tracing the hairline crack that had appeared after last week's rough seas. At 42, his body carried the marks of a life spent wrestling with the Atlantic. Calloused palms, crow's feet etched deep by salt and sun, a slight hunch to shoulders that had hauled countless traps and nets. The small fishing boat, named for his late wife, rocked gently against the dock in Portland Harbor, its white and blue paint faded but meticulously maintained. The morning fog clung to the water, shrouding the other vessels in ghostly silence. Fourth-generation fisherman, that's what the faded sign on his dock slip read. Harmon family fishing since 1923, a legacy that might end with him if things didn't change soon. The letter from Coastal Maine Bank sat folded in his back pocket, its contents memorized after countless readings. Final notice: payment due in full by the end of the month. The Catherine was all he had left, his home, his livelihood, his connection to the sea that had claimed his grandfather, shaped his father, and now threatened to swallow his future. The sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden dock pulled Rob from his thoughts. Captain Edward Sullivan approached, his 72-year-old frame still carrying the military bearing from decades in the Navy before turning to commercial fishing. The older man's face was a topographical map of a hard-lived life, deep lines cutting across leathery skin bronzed by decades under open skies. Ed's eyes narrowed as he examined the crack Rob was repairing. "Not good, boy. That epoxy won't hold against what's coming. The weather service might be calling for clear skies, but my knee says different." His gnarled fingers tapped his right leg, an old injury that had become his personal barometer over the years. Rob continued applying the marine epoxy, carefully filling the fracture. "The forecasts all show calm seas through Friday. I need 3 good days, Ed. Just 3 days to make the bank payment." The older man's expression darkened. "You've been checking the wrong signs, Robert. Commercial weather services follow satellite data. I follow the old ways. See those clouds building to the northeast? The way the gulls are flying? The glass has been falling all night." He gestured toward the horizon where faint wisps of high clouds stretched like fingers. "Something big is forming out there, mark my words." Rob straightened, feeling the protest in his lower back. 3 days is all I'm asking. After that, I can come in. The bank won't wait for better weather." Ed studied him with eyes that had witnessed 50 years of the ocean's temperament. "The ocean doesn't care about bank notices, son." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn notebook, flipping it open to reveal a folded check. "Take it. It's not much, but it'll buy you some time with those vultures." Rob's jaw tightened as he stared at the offering. "I can't, Ed. You're barely making ends meet yourself. Besides, Catherine always said, that stubborn pride is going to be the death of you, just like your father." Ed's voice softened. Benjamin would have taken the help, especially with Emma to think about. The mention of his daughter sent a pang through Rob's chest. Emma, 9 years old and already showing the scientific curiosity that had made Catherine such a brilliant marine biologist before the cancer took her. 3 years gone, and sometimes the absence still hit with the force of a rogue wave, unexpected and devastating. "I promised Emma I'd make her science fair this Friday." Rob's voice caught slightly. "She's presenting her ocean current project. If I miss another one," Ed tucked the check away with a resigned nod, "then you'd better be back Thursday night. But I'm telling you, there's weather coming that won't show on any forecast until it's too late." The distant sound of construction broke through the morning quiet, hydraulic hammers and heavy machinery echoing from the north end of the harbor, where Ocean View Enterprises was converting the old cannery into luxury waterfront condominiums. Phase 1 of Victor Reynolds' grand vision for revitalizing the working waterfront of Portland. Ed spat over the side of the dock. "Speaking of vultures, heard Reynolds is making another offer on the Harrison Pier. If that goes through, half the independent boats will have nowhere to dock by next season." Rob's hand stilled on the hull. Reynolds might have the city council in his pocket, but Harrison won't sell. His family's owned that pier for generations. "Every man has his price, boy." Ed's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many traditions fall to the highest bidder, especially when they're facing bankruptcy. "Just like Reynolds knew your father's price." The memory surfaced like a corpse in still water. Rob at 15, watching his father sign away their larger boat in prime fishing territories to the then rising entrepreneur Victor Reynolds after a particularly bad season. Benjamin Harmon had died 6 months later in what the official report called a fishing accident, though he'd been found in waters he'd never fished before. The marina gate buzzed and swung open, revealing Emma Harmon rushing down the dock, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, dark hair tucked messily under a hand-knitted beanie that Catherine had made during her final winter. She navigated the familiar path with the confidence of a child raised around boats, jumping the final gap onto the Catherine's deck with practiced ease. "Dad, I finished it!" Emma's breathless excitement bubbled over as she unzipped her backpack and carefully extracted a clear plastic container. Inside was an intricate model of the Gulf of Maine, complete with tiny colored strings representing ocean currents. "Look, I used actual NOAA data to map the currents. Ms. Parker says it's the most detailed project she's ever seen for the science fair." Rob crouched down, studying the meticulous work with genuine amazement. The precision of it, the tiny labels, the careful color coding, was all Catherine. That scientific mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. "You did this yourself? All of it?" Emma nodded vigorously, pointing out various features. "This shows how a person or object from Portland would drift if caught in the coastal current during summer conditions. And these are the countercurrents that form around these underwater ridges." Her small finger traced a path along the miniature topography. "Grandma helped with some of the measurements, but I did all the research and building." Rob felt a swell of pride mixing with the ever-present grief. "Catherine would be amazed, sweetheart. This is university-level work." Emma beamed, then her expression shifted to something more serious, more adult than her 9 years should allow. "You're still coming Friday, right? 3 o'clock. You promised." The weight of the bank notice seemed to double in Rob's pocket. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away. I'll be back Thursday night, latest." He forced confidence into his voice that he didn't entirely feel. "Just a quick trip out to George Bank. The cod are running heavy this time of year." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly, seeing more than he wanted her to. Her perception had always been unsettling, another inheritance from Catherine. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a scallop shell, perfectly formed, with swirls of pink and cream. "It was my special find from last summer, but I want you to take it, for luck." Rob accepted the offering with appropriate solemnity, tucking it into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. "I'll bring it right back to you, along with a hold full of fish, and maybe even some of those sand dollars you like to collect." Emma threw her arms around his neck, the scent of her strawberry shampoo momentarily overpowering the omnipresent smell of fish and salt. "Just bring yourself back, Dad. That's all I need." Over Emma's shoulder, Rob caught Ed's knowing gaze. The older man tapped his bad knee again and looked toward the horizon, his expression grave. Dawn broke gray and listless the next morning as Rob guided the Catherine out of Portland Harbor. The 50-foot vessel, technically classified as a small trawler but modified for versatility, had been in the family for 3 generations. Benjamin had downsized to it after selling their larger boat to Reynolds, a compromise that allowed them to keep fishing independently, if less profitably. The marine radio crackled with the standard NOAA weather report, still forecasting calm seas and good fishing conditions throughout the Gulf of Maine. Rob checked his watch, 4:30 a.m. If he pushed hard, he could reach his preferred grounds on George Bank by mid-morning, spend 2 solid days filling his hold, and be back before the science fair. The Catherine's engine thrummed steadily beneath his feet, the rhythm as familiar as his own heartbeat. The boat might be aging, but his father had taught him how to coax every ounce of performance from her tired systems. Proper maintenance wasn't just about function, it was reverence. The sea didn't forgive those who neglected their vessels. 8 hours later, Rob dropped his nets in the fertile waters of George Bank, 170 miles east of Cape Cod. The elevated seabed created ideal conditions for cod, haddock, and flounder, if you knew exactly where to look. The Harmon family had mapped these waters across 4 generations, passing down knowledge that no GPS could replicate. Rob consulted his father's old logbook, its pages yellowed and water-stained, cross-referencing positions with recent fish stock reports. By late afternoon, Rob had made 2 promising hauls, not record-breaking, but solid. The market prices were strong for fresh cod, and if he maintained this pace, he might just scrape together enough to make the minimum payment and keep the Catherine afloat for another month. The sun hung low on the western horizon when Rob spotted the sleek silhouette of a luxury yacht cutting through the waters 2 miles to his southeast. Even at this distance, he recognized the distinctive profile of the Prometheus, Victor Reynolds' 120-foot pleasure craft, rumored to have cost more than most fishermen would earn in 3 lifetimes. Rob dropped his binoculars onto the chart table, turning his attention back to his sonar readings. Whatever business a tech billionaire had out here didn't concern him. The Catherine's hold was only quarter full. He needed to focus on the night fishing ahead. An hour later, as dusk settled over the Atlantic, Rob noticed the Prometheus had changed course and was now anchored less than a mile from his position. Unusual for a pleasure craft to stop in open water rather than heading to one of the luxury marinas dotting the coast. Curiosity piqued, he raised his binoculars again. The yacht's deck lights illuminated a scene that made Rob's breath catch. Victor Reynolds stood at the stern, his tall frame unmistakable even at this distance. But he wasn't alone. 4 other men surrounded him, their bearing military straight, their clothing dark and utilitarian, rather than the casual luxury typical of Reynolds' usual associates. Rob adjusted the focus, squinting through the gathering darkness. Reynolds was gesturing toward something spread on a table between them, what looked like maps or charts. One of the men handed Reynolds what appeared to be an old-fashioned attaché case. The exchange had none of the casual body language of friends sharing drinks on a pleasure cruise. Acting on instinct, Rob reached for the marine radio, tuning to an open channel and lifting the volume to minimum. Sometimes larger vessels would leave their communications audible, especially when crews grew complacent away from shipping lanes. The radio hissed static for several minutes before a voice cut through, distant but clear enough to catch fragments. Project Seagull remains inactive, but salvage operation. Coordinates match the original survey. A second voice, sharper and immediately recognizable as Reynolds. I've invested 20 years and millions of dollars tracking this down. The technology alone could be worth billions if we can recover and reverse engineer it. The Navy thinks it's still buried under 40 years of bureaucratic paperwork. The first voice returned, risk exposure. If anyone connects you to, especially with your public profile now. Reynolds' laugh carried an edge of contempt. Who would believe a wild story about secret research stations? Besides, most of the original team is dead or discredited. Sullivan might suspect something, but he's a washed-up old sailor with no proof. And the Harmon boy is too busy trying to save his pathetic little boat to... Rob stiffened at the mention of his name, leaning closer to the radio. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by silence. When it returned seconds later, the voice was lower, more urgent. Sir, we have a radar contact. Small vessel, fishing class, been stationary nearby for some time. Through the binoculars, Rob saw Reynolds snap his head up, scanning the darkening horizon. A spotlight from the yacht suddenly blazed to life, sweeping across the water before finding and fixing on the Catherine. Rob ducked instinctively, though he knew he was already spotted. The radio crackled again with Reynolds' cold command. Check it out. No witnesses to this meeting. Could be coincidence, but I don't believe in those. If it's who I think it is, make sure he understands the consequences of curiosity. Rob killed his deck lights and fired up the Catherine's engine, pulling away from his fishing grounds with a silent apology to his empty hold. Whatever Reynolds was involved in, being identified as an observer couldn't end well. The yacht launched a smaller craft, a sleek speedboat that sliced through the water toward him with alarming velocity. Rob pushed the Catherine to full throttle, knowing he couldn't outrun the pursuit craft, but hoping the gathering darkness and his superior knowledge of these waters might provide an escape. A bank of fog rolled in from the northeast, thicker and more sudden than typical for this time of year. Rob steered directly into it, reducing speed to navigate by instruments alone. The Catherine might be older, but her radar was newly upgraded, one expense he hadn't skimped on despite financial pressures. The pursuing vessel's engine noise grew distant, then faded entirely as the fog enveloped the Catherine in cottony silence. Rob maintained his course for 15 minutes before throttling down, listening intently. Nothing but the gentle slap of waves against the hull and the distant moan of a foghorn miles away. Breathing easier, Rob returned to the wheelhouse to check his position, and froze. The electrical panel was sparking, thin tendrils of smoke rising from behind the circuit breakers. He lunged for the fire extinguisher, but before he could deploy it, the entire system went dark with a sickening pop. The Catherine drifted silently in the fog, her engine dead, her lights extinguished, her radio silenced. Rob's hands moved automatically, checking connections and breakers by the dim glow of his emergency flashlight. The diagnosis was grim. A catastrophic electrical failure had fried the system. Without power, he had no engine, no communications, no navigation. Ed's warning echoed in his mind as Rob climbed to the deck and scanned the horizon. The fog was thinning slightly to the east, revealing a sky transformed from the clear conditions forecasted. Dark, heavy clouds had materialized as if from nowhere, their undersides flickering with distant lightning. The barometer on the wall was dropping rapidly. A storm was coming, just as Ed had predicted. Rob worked feverishly over the next hour, attempting to bypass the damaged electrical system and restore at least partial power. As he labored, the wind rose from a whisper to a howl, and the first heavy raindrops pelted the deck. The Catherine began to pitch and roll as waves built from 3 feet to 6, then 10. The repair efforts grew increasingly desperate as the full force of the storm descended. This was no typical Atlantic squall. This was a monster that had formed with unnatural speed and ferocity, as if the ocean itself had conjured it specifically to devour him. The Catherine creaked and groaned under the assault, water sloshing over the gunnels with each massive wave. Rob abandoned the electrical repairs and focused on survival, lashing himself to the wheel with rope, and fighting to keep the bow pointed into the towering waves using only the manual rudder. Without engine power, it was like trying to steer a leaf in a waterfall. Nearly impossible, but surrendering meant certain death. A 15-foot wave struck the port side with devastating force. Rob heard the sickening crack of wood giving way, felt the deck tilt at an impossible angle. The Catherine was mortally wounded, taking on water faster than the manual pumps could handle. He had minutes, perhaps seconds. In a blur of instinct and training, Rob grabbed his emergency go bag. Always prepared, another lesson from his father. The waterproof survival pack contained basic first aid supplies, a multi-tool, waterproof matches, and a military-grade portable radio that had belonged to his father. He added Emma's scallop shell, his wallet with her photo, and the flask of fresh water kept in the wheelhouse. The next wave hit with apocalyptic force, rolling the Catherine nearly 90 degrees. Rob cut himself free from the wheel, stumbling across the nearly vertical deck. Water poured in through the shattered windows of the wheelhouse. The boat was going down. With a silent apology to his father and a prayer to Catherine to watch over Emma if he failed, Rob leapt from the sinking vessel into the churning maelstrom of the Atlantic. The ocean's embrace was brutally cold, the shock of it driving the air from his lungs, despite the insulation of his survival suit. Massive waves tossed him like a tsunami, alternately burying him under tons of water and launching him skyward on crests that seemed to touch the lightning-torn heavens. Rob lost all sense of time in this liquid purgatory, fighting simply to keep his head above water between the massive swells. The survival bag remained clutched to his chest, his lifeline to both survival and the memory of what he was fighting to return to. Emma's face flickered in his mind each time exhaustion tempted him to surrender. The storm raged through the night, gradually diminishing as dawn approached. Rob floated on his back during the calmer periods, conserving energy, taking inventory of his situation. The survival suit had done its job. He wasn't suffering severe hypothermia yet, though his extremities had gone numb hours ago. The waterproof bag had remained sealed, its contents his only resources. The Catherine was gone, presumably at the bottom of the Atlantic, and he was alone, adrift in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, with no idea if anyone even knew he was missing. The meeting he'd witnessed on Reynolds' yacht nagged at the edges of his consciousness. What was Project Seagull, and why had Reynolds mentioned his name specifically? As the first gray light of dawn filtered through dissipating storm clouds, Rob spotted something on the horizon, a dark shape breaking the endless meeting of sea and sky. Land? Impossible. He was too far from the coast. But as another swell lifted him, he confirmed the silhouette of what appeared to be a small island or outcropping. New energy surged through his exhausted body. Rob began swimming toward the landmass, fighting cross-currents that seemed determined to sweep him past this salvation. The distance closed with agonizing slowness. each stroke a battle against muscles threatening to cramp and shut down after hours in cold water. 50 yards from shore, Rob could make out the island's features, a forbidding landscape of dark volcanic rock rising perhaps 100 feet above sea level at its highest point. No trees were visible, just low, scrubby vegetation clinging to crevices. Not the tropical paradise of castaway fantasies, but solid ground nonetheless. The final approach nearly killed him. Jagged rocks lurked beneath the surface, and breaking waves threatened to smash him against them. Twice he was thrown back on the surf, his body scraping against stone that tore at his survival suit. On the third attempt, he caught hold of a barnacle-encrusted outcropping and held fast, riding out the wave's retreat before hauling himself inch by painful inch onto the rocky shore. Rob collapsed on the black volcanic sand, chest heaving, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. He was alive. The realization came slowly, followed by a wave of gratitude so intense it manifested as silent tears mixing with the salt water already streaking his face. When he'd recovered enough strength to lift his head, Rob took proper stock of his surroundings. The island was small, perhaps half a mile long and a quarter-mile wide. Its surface was predominantly dark volcanic rock with minimal vegetation. Hardy grasses, low-lying succulents, and what appeared to be stunted cacti clinging to life in the harshest crevices. No trees, no obvious fresh water, no sign of human habitation. Using a jagged rock for support, Rob pulled himself to his feet, wincing at the collection of cuts, bruises, and strained muscles cataloging themselves with each movement. The survival bag had made it intact, still clutched in his hand as if his body had prioritized it even in near unconsciousness. The first priority was shelter. Though the storm had passed, the wind still cut across the exposed rock with bitter persistence. Rob found a depression between two large boulders that offered some protection from the elements and set up a rudimentary camp. His survival training kicked in: assess resources, establish priorities, maintain focus on immediate needs rather than the enormity of the situation. Water would be his most urgent concern. Without fresh water, he had perhaps 3 days before dehydration became life-threatening. Food was secondary. The human body could survive weeks without it, though his energy would diminish rapidly. Rescue chances depended on whether anyone had tracked his last position and if this island appeared on nautical charts. Rob inventoried his meager supplies. The survival bag contained the military radio, which appeared undamaged though he couldn't test it yet, a multi-tool with knife, pliers, and other useful functions, a small first aid kit with basic bandages and antiseptic, waterproof matches in a sealed container, a compass, a small emergency thermal blanket, and approximately 20 feet of paracord. The water bottle held about 16 ounces of fresh water, enough for perhaps 1 day if strictly rationed. He carefully removed Emma's shell and the laminated photo from his wallet, setting them gently on a flat rock. His motivation made tangible. Then he turned to the military radio, an old model his father had always kept aboard their vessels. Rob had maintained it more out of sentiment than practical purpose, but now it might be his lifeline. The radio appeared physically intact, protected by its waterproof casing. Rob dried it as thoroughly as possible before attempting to power it on. To his immense relief, the screen flickered to life, indicating the batteries still held a charge. He immediately tuned to the emergency maritime frequency, transmitting a mayday call with his approximate last known position before the storm. Only static answered. Rob tried several other frequencies with the same result. Either the radio's transmission capability had been damaged despite its functioning display, or he was too far from any receivers. He would conserve the battery, trying at scheduled intervals rather than draining it continuously. The remainder of that first day was spent in methodical exploration of the island's eastern section. Rob moved slowly, conserving energy and taking small sips of water only when absolutely necessary. He searched for any sign of fresh water, depressions in rock that might collect rainfall, vegetation that indicated underground springs, anything that might extend his survival timeline. By sunset, Rob had made one promising discovery. A narrow fissure in the volcanic rock on the north side of the island contained a small pool of slightly brackish water. It wasn't ideal. He could taste the salt content, but it was significantly less saline than seawater. In an emergency, it could be consumed in small quantities without causing the devastating effects of drinking directly from the ocean. He also found several patches of the small cacti, which his survival training identified as potentially containing moisture. With careful conservation of resources and favorable weather, Rob calculated he might survive for weeks rather than days. But survival wasn't living, and every hour on the island was an hour away from Emma. That first night was the longest of Rob's life. He wedged himself between the protective boulders, wrapped in the emergency blanket that reflected his minimal body heat. The wind moaned across the rocky landscape with voices that sometimes sounded disturbingly human. Exhaustion eventually overcame discomfort, dragging him into a fitful sleep. His dreams were vivid and disjointed. Catherine stood on the shore, pointing towards something in the island's interior that Rob couldn't quite see. Emma called from somewhere just out of reach, her voice fading as he ran toward it. And strangest of all, his father appeared, standing beside a wall of rock, saying words Rob couldn't hear but desperately needed to understand. Rob woke with the first light, his body stiff and protesting, but his mind surprisingly clear. He had survived the first night. Now he needed to establish a sustainable system for the days ahead. Over the next 3 days, Rob developed a survival routine centered entirely around water acquisition. Each morning before dawn, he collected dew from rock surfaces using his torn shirt as an absorbent material, wringing the precious moisture directly into his mouth or the water bottle. He carefully harvested several of the small cacti, extracting their internal moisture, while leaving enough of each plant to regenerate. And he rationed the brackish water from the rock fissure, taking only enough to supplement his other sources. On the fourth day, salvation came from above. A brief but intense rainstorm swept across the island, allowing Rob to collect relatively fresh water in every available container and natural depression. He drank deeply for the first time since the shipwreck, the simple pleasure of hydration feeling like an unimaginable luxury. The rain also revealed something Rob hadn't noticed before. On the northern edge of the island, a colony of seals had established territory on the only section of shoreline that sloped gently enough for easy access to the water. The bull of the group was massive, easily 700 pounds, with a distinctive scar running from his right eye down to his jaw. Rob mentally named him Scars and made a note to give the colony wide berth. Bulls were notoriously territorial and could easily kill a human if provoked. With water temporarily secured, Rob turned his attention to food. Using strands pulled from his survival suit and the hook from his multi-tool, he crafted a rudimentary fishing line. Small crabs found among the tidal rocks served as bait. His first attempts yielded nothing, but by the third day of fishing, he managed to catch a small, cod-like fish about the size of his hand. Rather than immediately eating it, Rob processed the fish methodically. First, he consumed the eyes, an unappetizing but valuable source of moisture. Next, he carefully collected the fish's blood in his bottle cap, drinking the mineral-rich fluid. Only then did he eat the raw flesh, chewing slowly to extract every bit of nutrition and moisture before finally spitting out the indigestible fibers. By the end of the first week, Rob had established a functional, if precarious, survival system. Each small victory, creating fire on the 10th day, using his waterproof matches and dried seaweed, improving his shelter with carefully positioned rocks, developing more effective fishing techniques, built confidence that he might endure until rescue came. But would rescue come? Rob had no way of knowing if the Catherine's disappearance had been noted, if search parties had been dispatched, or if they had any reason to look for this tiny, unmapped island. The military radio remained stubbornly silent despite his regular transmission attempts, its battery power steadily diminishing. As the days passed, Rob's thoughts increasingly turned to the conversation he'd overheard on Reynolds' yacht, Project Seagull, the mention of his name, of Captain Sullivan. The implication that his father might have been involved in something Reynolds wanted to keep buried. These fragments tumbled through his mind during the long, empty hours, forming connections and raising questions he'd never considered before. Had his father's death truly been an accident? Benjamin Harmon had been a supremely skilled captain, intimately familiar with the waters he fished. The official report cited equipment failure and an unexpected storm, not unlike what had happened to Rob himself. The coincidence felt increasingly suspicious in light of Reynolds's cryptic comments. On the 15th day, during his morning exploration, Rob made a discovery that changed everything. While searching for new water sources on the eastern side of the island, he noticed something odd about a particular rock face. The volcanic formation had straight edges that seemed too regular to be natural. Approaching closer, he ran his fingers along the surface, feeling distinct tool marks beneath years of weathering. This section of wall had been worked by human hands. Rob's pulse quickened. He examined the area more carefully, finding a small piece of corroded metal half buried in the sand nearby. Brushing away decades of accumulated grit revealed part of a military insignia and the faded letters Proje Psi before the metal broke off. Project Seagull, the same name Reynolds had mentioned on his yacht. That night, unable to sleep despite physical exhaustion, Rob took out the military radio again. He'd been conserving its battery, using it only for brief transmission attempts every few days. Now he methodically worked through different frequencies, including some he hadn't tried before. Old military bands, weather channels long obsolete, anything that might connect to whatever had once existed on this island. Just as he was about to give up, something changed in the static. Not speech, but a pattern, rhythmic pulses that seemed deliberate rather than random atmospheric noise. Rob adjusted the tuning carefully, focusing on frequency 78.5 MHz, a band he hadn't explored before. The pattern strengthened slightly, though still too weak to resolve into clear sound. Rob placed the radio near his ear, straining to interpret the signal. It faded in and out, tantalizingly close to coherence before dissolving back into white noise. Rob switched off the radio to conserve battery, but sleep remained elusive. His mind raced with possibilities. Had he imagined the pattern? The human brain was wired to find meaning in randomness, especially under stress. Or had he actually detected something? Perhaps automated equipment still functioning somewhere on or near the island. The next day, Rob returned to the worked stone wall, examining it with renewed purpose. He tapped along its surface with his multi-tool, listening for variations in the sound that might indicate hollow spaces behind the solid facade. Most sections rang solid, but one area produced a distinctly different tone, more resonant, suggesting an open space beyond. As Rob contemplated how to investigate further without tools, movement at the corner of his vision caught his attention. He turned quickly, but saw nothing except the rocky landscape and scrubby vegetation. Yet the sensation of being watched persisted. Throughout the day, these peripheral glimpses continued, shadow figures that vanished when directly observed. Sometimes they resembled a woman's silhouette, sometimes a child's smaller form. Rob told himself they were hallucinations, products of isolation and stress, yet they felt unnervingly real. That night marked 20 days since the shipwreck, 20 days of survival against brutal odds. 20 days away from Emma, who must be frantic with worry if she hadn't already been told her father was presumed lost at sea, just like her mother had been lost to cancer 3 years earlier. The thought of Emma believing herself twice orphaned drove Rob to his knees, a pain far worse than any physical suffering the island had inflicted. He clutched her photo and shell, whispering promises to the night that he would find a way home, that he would not abandon her. When exhaustion finally claimed him, Rob's dreams were more vivid than ever. Catherine walked beside him along the island's shore, her hand cool in his. "Look closer, Rob. The answer's been here all along." His father appeared on the worked stone wall, pointing to a specific location. "Listen to what's been forgotten, son." The voices were so clear, so present, that waking brought a fresh wave of loss. Following the strange compulsion from his dream, Rob returned to the military radio that morning. As the device powered on, he noticed the battery indicator showing less than 20% remaining. He would have perhaps 2 more attempts before losing this potential lifeline completely. Tuning directly to 78.5 MHz, Rob was startled by the immediate strength of the signal compared to the previous night. The rhythmic pattern was clearer, almost like codedict or speech breaking through heavy interference. He adjusted the antenna, holding the radio in different positions to maximize reception, and then breaking through static like a voice from another world, Rob heard it, fragmented but undeniable. "Station Project Seagull. Coordinates 41.25 north, 67.42 west. East observation chamber operational. Next report in 24 hours. The transmission cut back to static, but Rob remained frozen, the radio clutched in white-knuckled hands. The words matched exactly what Reynolds had discussed on his yacht. And the coordinates. They were here. This island. Rob looked up at the worked stone wall with new understanding. There wasn't just history here. There was technology, infrastructure, perhaps resources that could ensure his survival and maybe even facilitate rescue. Somewhere beneath this barren rock was an east observation chamber that was somehow impossibly still operational after what must be decades of abandonment. The wall no longer represented just a human presence on the island. It was potentially a door, a portal to salvation if he could find a way through. Morning light filtered through gaps in Rob's improvised rock shelter, casting thin beams across his weathered face. 21 days marooned on this volcanic outcrop had reshaped him, his beard now a patchy collection of salt-crusted whiskers, his frame leaner as daily rations of raw fish and cactus pulp proved insufficient to maintain his former fisherman's physique. The radio transmission from last night remained burned in his consciousness. Project Seagull, East Observation Chamber. The same words Reynolds had spoken on his yacht before the storm. Rob returned to the worked stone wall, running his fingers across the weathered surface with new purpose. No longer just a curiosity, this wall represented something that connected his current predicament to his father, to Reynolds, to a mystery decades in the making. He methodically examined every inch of the section that had produced the hollow sound, searching for seams, hinges, anything that might indicate an entry point. After hours of careful examination, Rob found nothing resembling a door or hatch. Whatever access point had once existed had been meticulously sealed or disguised. He would need tools more substantial than his multi-tool to break through volcanic rock. Rob scanned the shoreline, seeking stones that might serve as rudimentary hammers and chisels. Several promising candidates emerged from his search. A flat basalt slab with a sharp edge, a dense round stone that fit his palm perfectly. That night, Rob positioned himself in his shelter, the military radio balanced carefully on a flat rock beside him. As the display showed 2:00 a.m., he tuned to 78.5 MHz and waited. The static wavered, then gradually resolved into the same rhythmic pattern he had heard before. The transmission seemed stronger tonight, though still breaking up at intervals. Station, Project Seagull, coordinates 41.25 north, 67.42 west, East Observation Chamber operational. Weather monitoring continues. All systems nominal. Next report in 24 hours. Rob pressed the radio closer to his ear, desperately trying to catch every syllable. A weather monitoring station? The revelation both answered questions and raised new ones. His father had been in the Navy before becoming a fisherman. Could he have been stationed here, at this remote outpost? Was that why Reynolds had mentioned the Harmon name specifically? Dawn found Rob already at work on the wall, using his improvised tools to probe the volcanic surface. The basalt chisel proved surprisingly effective against the weathered areas, allowing him to gradually widen existing cracks. His progress remained painfully slow, inches gained through hours of labor. But the hollow sound grew more pronounced as he worked deeper. By the day's end, Rob had created a shallow depression about 4 inches deep in the center of the targeted area. Exhausted, hands bloody despite the protection of fabric torn from his survival suit, he retreated to his shelter as darkness fell. The physical exertion had depleted his limited energy reserves. Tomorrow he would need to focus on food and water before continuing his excavation. Day 23 broke with unexpected thunder rolling across the island. Rob emerged from his shelter to find the sky transformed. Dark clouds boiling on the horizon, wind already rising to a threatening howl. The barometric pressure plummeted as a summer storm system, uncommon but not unprecedented in these waters, bore down on his fragile sanctuary. Rob scrambled to secure his meager possessions, weighing down the emergency blanket with heavy stones, tucking the radio and his most precious items, Emma's shell and photo, into a protected crevice. The rain, when it came, arrived not as gentle drops, but as a solid wall of water driven horizontally by gale-force winds. For hours, Rob huddled in his rock shelter, soaked despite its protection as water found every possible entry point. The storm's ferocity exceeded anything he had expected from this latitude in summer. Lightning struck repeatedly across the island's highest points, thunder so close it rattled his bones. Through it all, a small voice in the back of his mind wondered if this was natural or somehow connected to whatever lay behind that wall. When the tempest finally abated 18 hours later, the island had been transformed. Pools of fresh water filled every depression, rock surfaces scoured clean of salt and grime. Rob emerged on unsteady legs, his body weakened by the long confinement without food, but his spirits lifted at the abundance of drinking water suddenly available. After replenishing his depleted water reserves and catching a disoriented fish stranded in a tidal pool, Rob explored the storm's effects on the island. The most significant change appeared on the northern shoreline. The seal colony had vanished, apparently driven to seek better shelter by the storm's fury. Their absence opened access to sections of the island previously too dangerous to explore due to the territorial bull. Rob cautiously approached the newly accessible area, alert for any seals that might have remained behind. The landscape here differed subtly from the rest of the island in more regular formations, areas where it appeared rock had been cleared or arranged deliberately. In one protected alcove, half buried by decades of accumulated sand, Rob uncovered something that stopped his breath: a rusted metal box. The container had long since lost any semblance of waterproofing, its contents destroyed by salt water and time. But etched into its lid, still faintly visible beneath corrosion, was an insignia that sparked immediate recognition: the official seal of the United States Navy, alongside the partially legible text "Project Seagull" and Commodore's equipment storage. Rob sat back on his heels, mind racing. Concrete evidence of military presence, of Project Seagull, exactly as the transmission had indicated. This wasn't just some automated weather station. This had been something significant enough to warrant official Navy designation. Something that Victor Reynolds, decades later, considered worth investing 20 years and millions of dollars to recover. Scattered around the box, Rob discovered other artifacts: corroded battery cells, fragments of what might have been electronic components, a piece of heavy-duty cable disappearing into the rocky soil. He followed this cable's path, carefully excavating along its length until it led directly to the worked stone wall he'd been attempting to breach. The storm had changed more than just the seal colony's location. As Rob returned to the wall, he noticed the rain had washed away years of accumulated grime, revealing subtle details previously hidden. A small depression at eye level, perfectly circular and roughly an inch in diameter, now became visible in the stone surface. An old keyhole, deliberately disguised but exposed by the cleansing downpour. Rob pressed his finger into the depression, feeling the mechanism within. A key. He needed a key to open whatever lay behind this wall. His heart sank at the impossibility of finding such a specific item after so many years. Yet the discovery renewed his determination. If there was a keyhole, there had to be an alternative entry method. Perhaps a weakness in the surrounding structure, a maintenance access, something he could exploit with his limited tools. As twilight approached, Rob made his way back to his shelter, his mind preoccupied with the day's discoveries. The radio had become a nightly ritual, his connection to the mysterious transmission that seemed to be originating from within the very wall he sought to breach. Tonight, however, brought something new. As 2 a.m. approached, Rob noticed the signal strength indicator on the radio display climbing higher than ever before. The transmission burst through with startling clarity. Weather station Barren Rock. Coordinates 41.25 north, 67.42 west. East observation chamber operational. All systems maintaining baseline function. Exterior temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure 30.12 and rising. Sea conditions moderate. Next report in 24 hours. Rob's heart raced at the name. Barren Rock. His island had a designation. The transmission sounded automated, like a recording set to play at regular intervals. But the weather data matched current conditions precisely. How could a decades-old system still be operational, still reporting accurate readings? Sleep proved elusive that night as Rob's mind churned with theories and possibilities. When exhaustion finally claimed him, his dreams carried him back to Portland. to the small two-bedroom apartment he shared with Emma. His daughter sat at the kitchen table, her ocean current model spread before her, but transformed. Where the Gulf of Maine had been, a perfect replica of barren rock now rose from blue resin waves. "Look closer, Dad." Emma's small finger pointed to the eastern side of the miniature island. "The answer's right there where the lines all meet." Rob woke with the first light, the dream lingering with unusual clarity. Something about the eastern wall, about the currents Emma had mapped, tugged at his memory. He pulled out the photo of his daughter, studying her face as though it might contain the answer to his current predicament. The photograph's edges had begun to curl from salt exposure, despite his efforts to protect it. In the image, Emma smiled broadly, missing her two front teeth, her arm around Rob's waist as they stood on the Catherine's deck. Behind them, barely visible at the photo's edge, hung one of his father's old navigational charts of the Gulf of Maine. Rob squinted at this background detail, wishing he could enlarge it, wondering if barren rock appeared on those old charts or if it had been deliberately omitted from civilian navigation resources. A memory surfaced, Benjamin Harmon at the kitchen table, charting courses in his logbook, his finger tapping a spot well east of the common fishing grounds. "That's a place to avoid, Robbie. Bad currents, underwater shoals, nothing there but trouble for fishermen." Had his father known about barren rock all along? Had he been warning his son away from a classified location he wasn't supposed to acknowledge existed? Day 25 brought renewed determination to Rob's excavation efforts. The keyhole discovery suggested a more sophisticated entry mechanism than he had initially suspected. Rather than brute force, perhaps precision was required. He focused his efforts on the area immediately surrounding the keyhole, gently chipping away accumulated mineral deposits that might be jamming the mechanism. As midday approached, the island's ambient noise, waves against rock, wind through crevices, the distant cry of seabirds, changed subtly. A new sound emerged, so faint Rob initially believed he'd imagined it. A mechanical hum, barely perceptible, seemed to emanate from within the wall itself. He pressed his ear against the stone, confirming the vibration. Something behind this barrier had activated, some machinery cycling through an automated sequence. Rob worked with renewed urgency, carefully clearing debris from the keyhole and surrounding area. His makeshift chisel slipped suddenly, skidding across the rock face and opening a small cut across his palm. Blood welled immediately, and Rob pulled back with a curse. As he wiped the wound against his pant leg, his eye caught something reflecting sunlight from within the newly cleared keyhole, a metallic mechanism, untouched by corrosion, gleaming as though installed yesterday rather than decades ago. The sophistication of the lock mechanism suggested this was no simple weather station. Rob had served enough time on commercial vessels to recognize military-grade hardware when he saw it. This was designed to last, to withstand not just the elements, but potentially hostile attempts at entry. Whatever Project Seagull truly involved, it had warranted significant security measures. That evening, Rob ventured farther along the island's eastern side, exploring areas previously dominated by the seal colony. The storm had revealed features long buried under sand and debris, a series of eroded concrete footings that might once have supported antenna arrays or monitoring equipment, a partial perimeter of what could have been security fencing now reduced to rusted stumps protruding from the volcanic soil. Most significant was his discovery in a small protected cove, a flat rectangular depression cut into the rock, approximately the size needed for a small landing craft to beach itself. Crude steps had been cut into the adjacent stone, leading up toward the main plateau. This had been an access point, a way for personnel to reach whatever facility lay hidden within the island's interior. Rob followed the ancient pathway, noting areas where the rock had been deliberately worked to create easier passage. The trail led directly to the eastern wall with its hidden keyhole, confirming his suspicion that this represented the main entry point to whatever lay beyond. As he turned to head back to his shelter before darkness fell, a movement at the corner of his vision froze him in place. The shadowy figure of a woman stood atop a distant rock formation, her outline unmistakable against the setting sun. For a breathless moment, Rob thought it was Catherine, the same silhouette that had haunted his peripheral vision throughout his time on the island. But when he turned fully toward the figure, he saw nothing but empty rock and sky. The hallucination, if that's what it was, had vanished. These visions had grown more frequent over the past days. Sometimes Catherine, sometimes a child-sized shadow he associated with Emma, occasionally a male figure he couldn't identify. Rob knew isolation and stress could produce such phenomena, yet they carried an unsettling weight of reality. The woman's silhouette had seemed so solid, so present, that dismissing it as mere hallucination required conscious effort. Night 28 brought another storm, less violent than its predecessor, but bearing abundant rainfall. Rob positioned every available container to collect the precious fresh water, allowing himself the luxury of drinking deeply for the first time in days. With his thirst thoroughly quenched and his reserves replenished, he felt his mental clarity sharpen. He tuned the radio precisely at 2 o'clock a.m., waiting for the now familiar transmission. Tonight brought a subtle change to the automated message. Weather station Barren Rock. Coordinates 41.25 north, 67.42 west. East observation chamber operational. Warning, main power reserves at 30% capacity. Solar charging efficiency reduced to 47% nominal. Estimated system failure in 73 days without maintenance intervention. Next report in 24 hours. The transmission repeated once more before fading into static. Rob stared at the radio in his hands, processing this new information. The system was failing. The system, well, whatever power source had kept this automated station functioning for what must be decades, was finally reaching its limits. The timeline gave Rob both hope and anxiety. 73 days meant the system would likely remain operational during his time on the island, but it also emphasized the finite nature of this mysterious resource he'd discovered. Morning brought Rob back to the wall with renewed determination. He had established that direct force wouldn't breach the barrier. The volcanic rock was too dense, his tools too primitive. The keyhole represented his best chance at entry, but without the actual key, he needed an alternative approach. Examining his multi-tool, Rob considered its various components. The small pliers were too large for the keyhole, but the flathead screwdriver attachment might serve as a primitive lockpick. He had no experience with such skills, but necessity had proven an effective teacher during his island captivity. For hours, Rob worked at the lock mechanism, inserting the tool and feeling for any movement within. The precision engineering resisted his amateur attempts, but persistence gradually revealed the internal components, a pin system that required specific positioning to disengage. By mid-afternoon, sweat dripping from his brow despite the moderate temperature, Rob had managed to manipulate 2 of what he estimated were 5 pins into their correct positions. The sound of splashing from the northern shore interrupted his concentration. Rob froze, listening intently as the unmistakable barking of seals carried across the island. The colony was returning. His time to explore this area freely was running out. Rob gathered his tools and retreated to a vantage point overlooking the northern cove. Sure enough, the first members of the seal colony had returned, hauling themselves onto the rocky shore with awkward determination. At their head was the massive bull he'd named Scars, immediately recognizable by the distinctive mark across his face. The creature surveyed its domain with territorial focus, its massive body dwarfing the females and juveniles that followed. The seal's return complicated Rob's situation considerably. The northern approach to the wall would soon become inaccessible again, forcing him to take a longer, more exposed route across the island's central plateau. More concerning was the proximity of the seal colony to his primary freshwater collection area. The fissure containing brackish but drinkable water now lay directly in their territory. Rob needed to gather as much water as possible before the bull fully established its domain. Moving quickly but quietly along the rocky periphery, he approached the water source with his empty bottle and several makeshift containers fashioned from salvaged materials. The nearest seals, mostly females, watched his approach with wary eyes, but made no aggressive movements. Scars, however, detected the human intruder almost immediately. The massive bull raised its head, nostrils flaring as it caught Rob's scent on the breeze. A deep, threatening vocalization rumbled from its chest as it began moving with surprising speed across the rocks, its powerful body propelling it toward the perceived threat. Rob abandoned finesse, grabbing his water containers and scrambling up the nearest climbable rock face. The bull seal pursued to the edge of its capabilities, lunging upward with shocking power before gravity reclaimed it. Teeth snapped mere inches from Rob's boot as he pulled himself beyond reach, heart hammering against his ribs. From his elevated position, Rob watched the colony reclaim its territory. His water-gathering expedition had yielded only partial success, one full bottle and another half-filled container. It would have to suffice until he could devise a safer approach or find alternative sources. The precious liquid sloshed in its containers as he made his way carefully back to his shelter, planning his next move in this increasingly complex survival chess match. Day 32 dawned with another meteorological surprise. Dark clouds building rapidly on the horizon, much as Ed Sullivan had predicted before Rob's ill-fated fishing trip. The old captain's weather sense had proven accurate then. Rob had no reason to doubt the warning signs now. He spent the morning securing his shelter, positioning rocks to channel water away from his sleeping area while ensuring his collection containers would maximize rainfall capture. The storm struck with impressive force, wind-driven rain lashing the island for hours. Rob huddled in his shelter, listening to the tempest's fury while counting the increasing water reserves as a silver lining. When the deluge finally subsided late afternoon, he emerged to find the island transformed once again. Newly formed streams cutting across the volcanic surface, pooled water in every depression, vegetation flattened by wind and water. Most significantly, the seal colony had been displaced again, driven by storm surge and instinct to seek more protected waters elsewhere. Rob immediately took advantage of their absence, gathering water from his primary source and exploring areas the bull had previously rendered inaccessible. Near the base of the eastern wall, partially exposed by storm runoff, Rob made a discovery that sent electricity through his veins, a small metallic object protruding from the gravel. Kneeling, he carefully excavated around it, revealing what appeared to be a key. Not modern, but military-grade, crafted from non-corrosive alloy that had withstood decades of burial remarkably well. Its head featured a Navy insignia, nearly identical to the one he'd seen on the rusted equipment box. Rob held the key with trembling fingers, hardly daring to believe his fortune. Coincidence seemed too mild a word, finding the exact tool needed to open the mysterious door precisely when he needed it. Had the previous storm loosened it from its hiding place? Had this second downpour completed the work of uncovering it? Or was there some other explanation? Something connecting to the phantom figures that haunted his peripheral vision. With the key clutched firmly, Rob returned to the wall and its hidden lock mechanism. The metal object fit perfectly into the keyhole, its shape precisely matching the depression he'd spent days clearing. Rob held his breath as he attempted to turn it, meeting resistance from decades of disuse. Applying gentle but firm pressure, he felt something give within the mechanism, a subtle click followed by the sound of long, dormant gears engaging for the first time in years. The wall, however, remained solid. No hidden door swung open, no secret passage revealed itself. Rob frowned, examining the key more carefully. Perhaps this unlocked only one layer of security? Military installations often employed multiple safeguards. The key had definitely engaged something within the mechanism. He could hear faint mechanical movements behind the stone surface, but additional steps were clearly required. That night's radio transmission confirmed his suspicion. Weather station Barren Rock, coordinates 41.25 north, 67.42 west. East observation chamber operational. Security systems partially activated. Awaiting secondary authentication protocols. Main power reserves at 28% capacity. Next report in 24 hours. The system was waiting for additional authentication, likely a code, a second key, or some other security measure beyond what Rob possessed. Frustration threatened to overwhelm him after coming so tantalizingly close to breakthrough, but he forced himself to think methodically. The key had changed something in the system. Progress had been made. He needed to continue exploring, continue searching for clues. In his dreams that night, Rob found himself standing in his father's study, a room unchanged since Benjamin Harmon's death decades earlier. His father sat at the desk, younger than Rob remembered him, dressed in a Navy uniform rather than his customary fisherman's attire. On the desk lay an open logbook, coordinates and cryptic notations filling its pages. Ben looked up, his expression urgent. "The sequence matters, son. 5 points on the star, each with its purpose. Remember what I taught you about navigation. True north isn't always where the compass points." Rob woke with fragments of the dream still vivid in his mind. 5 points on a star. Naval security systems often incorporated symbolic elements. Anchors, stars, eagles. The keyhole had turned, but perhaps it needed to be positioned specifically or turned in a particular sequence. Returning to the wall at first light, Rob examined the keyhole more carefully. Now that the key had engaged, he could feel subtle indentations at 5 points around the circular opening, positions corresponding to points of a star. He tried turning the key to each position, listening for any change in the mechanism. At the third position, corresponding to the top point of the star, another distinct click emanated from within the wall. Rob continued the sequence, turning to the fourth and fifth positions, each producing similar mechanical acknowledgement. After the final position, a more substantial sound emerged from behind the stone, something large shifting, metal against metal, followed by the hiss of compressed air being released. A thin line appeared in the previously seamless stone surface, a vertical seam running from ground level to approximately 7 feet high. Rob stepped back, watching in astonishment as decades of accumulated mineral deposits cracked and crumbled along the emerging door outline. The barrier, however, remained firmly in place. The security system had recognized the key sequence but hadn't fully disengaged the locking mechanism. Rob pushed against the visible seam, meeting solid resistance. Something more was needed, perhaps a specific pressure point or another key entirely. Frustration mounted as he searched the surrounding area for additional clues, finding nothing that suggested the next step in the access sequence. As Rob contemplated his next move, movement on the northern shore caught his attention. The seal colony was returning earlier than expected, with scars once again leading the procession. The massive bull paused at the water's edge, head raised, seeming to look directly at Rob despite the considerable distance between them. A primitive yet unmistakable intelligence radiated from the creature. Territorial awareness, threat assessment, determination. Over the next days, Rob divided his efforts between continuing work on the wall and maintaining his survival routine. The seal colony had fully reestablished itself, with scars establishing clear dominance over prime territory, including Rob's main water source. Gathering supplies now required careful timing and routes to avoid confrontation with the aggressive bull. Day 35 brought another significant discovery. While examining the stone surface surrounding the partially revealed door, Rob noticed a small depression in the rock, approximately 3 feet to the right of the seam. Unlike the keyhole, this appeared to be a natural formation in the volcanic material, or designed to appear that way to casual observation. When he pressed his finger into the cavity, he felt it depress slightly, followed by another mechanical click from within the wall. A pressure switch, camouflaged to blend with the natural rock formations. Rob immediately began searching for others, finding 2 more similar depressions at varying heights along the wall. Each responded to pressure with the same mechanical acknowledgement. A pattern was emerging, the key sequence followed by activation of hidden switches in a specific order might fully disengage the locking mechanism. That night's dream transported Rob to the Catherine's wheelhouse. His father stood at the helm, but instead of navigating open water, the boat remained docked. Benjamin was manipulating not the ship's controls, but a complex panel hidden behind the wooden bulkhead. 5 switches in a specific sequence, son. Always the same pattern, whether you're opening secure communications channels or access points. The sequence protects what matters. Rob woke with absolute clarity about his next steps. The 3 pressure points needed to be activated in a specific order, the same 5-point star pattern he had used with the key. He returned to the wall at first light, methodically applying pressure to each switch in the sequence revealed in his dream. Upon pressing the final switch, a more substantial mechanical response emanated from within the barrier. The sound of heavy bolts retracting, of systems awakening from decades of dormancy. The vertical seam widened slightly, a whisper of different air, cooler, damper, escaping from the newly created gap. Rob positioned his fingers in the narrow opening, applying steady outward pressure. The door resisted initially, then yielded with a protesting groan of metal and stone. Light spilled into a darkness that hadn't been breached in decades, revealing the beginning of a passageway leading downward into the island's interior. Success after weeks of effort. The entrance to the East Observation Chamber, to Project Seagull, to whatever secrets had been worth Reynolds' decades-long search. Before Rob could explore further, a bellowing roar shattered the moment's triumph. Scars had separated from the colony, moving with surprising speed across the rocky terrain directly toward Rob's position. The bull seal's aggression had escalated beyond territorial display to active pursuit, its massive body propelling forward with alarming determination. Rob retreated from the partially open door, seeking higher ground as the enraged animal closed the distance between them. Finding himself backed against a steep rock face with no immediate escape route, he drew his multi-tool knife, a pitiful defense against 700 pounds of territorial fury, but his only option. Scars lunged upward with explosive power, jaws snapping. Rob dodged sideways, but not quickly enough to completely avoid contact. The bull's teeth grazed his left arm, tearing through the remnants of his survival suit and into flesh beneath. Pain blazed along his forearm as blood immediately darkened the fabric. The seal's momentum carried it past Rob, providing a momentary opening. He scrambled up the rock face, seeking safety and height that the marine mammal couldn't match. Reaching a ledge 10 feet up, Rob paused to assess his injury, a deep laceration running from wrist to elbow, bleeding freely but appearing to have missed major vessels. The immediate danger was infection. The bull's mouth harbored bacteria that could prove deadly without proper treatment. Scars remained below, circling with frustrated aggression before finally returning to the colony after nearly an hour of standoff. Rob's arm throbbed with increasing intensity as he made his way carefully back to his shelter, where he used his limited first aid supplies to clean and bind the wound as best he could. The pain was considerable, but more worrying was the knowledge that proper medical treatment was impossible in his current situation. Over the next days, Rob's condition deteriorated as infections set in despite his best efforts. Fever came in waves, leaving him alternately shivering and burning as bacteria spread through the wound. He rationed his remaining clean water, recognizing that hydration might make the difference between survival and succumbing to infection. By day 40, Rob existed in a semi-delirious state, floating between consciousness and fevered dreams. Catherine appeared regularly now, not just in peripheral vision but sitting beside him, her cool hand on his forehead, her voice soothing though he couldn't quite make out the words. Emma visited too, her small hands arranging seashells in complex patterns that seemed to contain messages he couldn't decipher. Most disturbing were the visions of his father, now appearing in full Navy uniform rather than his fisherman's attire. Benjamin Harmon stood at the partially open door in the eastern wall, gesturing urgently for Rob to follow, his lips forming words lost to the wind. They need to know what happened here, what Reynolds did, what they found. During moments of clarity, Rob forced himself to drink, to consume small amounts of the fish and cactus that constituted his diet, to change the increasingly foul-smelling bandage on his arm. The wound had developed an angry red streak extending toward his shoulder, blood poisoning advancing through his system. Without antibiotics, his chances of survival diminished with each passing hour. Day 42 brought a turning point. Rain fell again, gentle but persistent, filling Rob's collection vessels with fresh water. The cool downpour seemed to temporarily reduce his fever, allowing moments of greater lucidity. He used this clarity to drink deeply and rebandage his wound, washing it as thoroughly as possible with fresh rainwater. In one such moment of coherence, Rob realized the radio transmission had changed again. Weather Station Barren Rock. East Observation Chamber security protocols partially overridden. Emergency access granted. Medical supplies located in Section 3, Shelf Unit Alpha. Repeat, emergency medical protocols initiated. The automated system had somehow detected his presence, his injury, his need. Or perhaps, the thought arose unbidden, someone or something was actively monitoring and had changed the message specifically to aid him. Either possibility seemed equally implausible, yet the transmission had unmistakably provided information directly relevant to his situation. Despite his weakened condition, Rob knew his survival depended on reaching those medical supplies. The infection would kill him within days without intervention. He gathered his remaining strength, collected water for the journey, and set out toward the eastern wall with its partially open door. The trek across the island proved nightmarish. Distances that had once taken minutes now required hours as Rob paused frequently to rest, his body burning with fever despite the cool air. Twice he collapsed entirely, lying on the volcanic rock until consciousness fully returned. The third time he woke to find himself being watched, not by scars or another seal, but by what appeared to be a man standing on a distant outcropping. The figure remained just long enough for Rob to register its presence before disappearing behind rock formations. Rob finally reached the eastern wall as afternoon shadows lengthened across the island. The door remained as he had left it, partially open, a sliver of darkness visible beyond. Gathering his final reserves of strength, he pulled it further open, creating a gap just wide enough to slip through sideways. Cool, damp air enveloped him as he entered the passageway, the first human to breach this facility in what must be decades. His flashlight, batteries carefully conserved throughout his ordeal, revealed a tunnel descending into the island's interior, its walls a combination of natural volcanic formation and human engineering. Metal supports reinforced the ceiling at regular intervals, their surfaces showing remarkably little corrosion given the time frame and environment. Rob proceeded cautiously, each step requiring conscious effort as fever and blood loss took their toll. The passage sloped downward at a gentle but consistent angle, leading deeper beneath the island's surface. After approximately 50 feet, it widened into a small antechamber with a more substantial door at the far end. This one metal rather than stone, with a standard handle mechanism rather than elaborate security measures. Beyond this second door lay Rob's first glimpse of the East Observation Chamber, a space approximately 30 feet square, carved from the island's volcanic heart and reinforced with industrial materials. Banks of equipment lined the walls, much of it covered with protective sheeting. Status lights blinked on various consoles, indicating systems in standby mode rather than complete shutdown. The facility hummed with subtle electrical activity, impossible yet undeniable evidence that power still flowed through circuits installed decades earlier. Rob scanned the room, seeking the medical supplies mentioned in the transmission. Section 3, Shelf Unit Alpha. The room's organization became apparent as he noticed alphanumeric designations stenciled on each wall. Section 3 occupied the far corner, its shelving units labeled with Greek letters. Unit A, Alpha, contains sealed metal containers, their contents labeled in faded but legible text. Medical supplies. Emergency use only. With trembling hands, Rob opened the nearest container. Inside, protected by ingenious design from both time and elements, lay items he had thought beyond hope. Sealed packages of antibiotics, sterile bandages, antiseptic solutions, even basic surgical instruments. Military-grade emergency medical supplies, designed for extended storage in remote locations. Rob tore open an antibiotic package with his teeth, swallowing the pills dry before turning his attention to properly cleaning and dressing his infected wound. The supplies included injectable antibiotics as well, more potent but requiring skill he wasn't sure he possessed in his current state. He opted for the oral medication first, hoping it would bring his infection under control without requiring self-administered injections. As the immediate medical crisis received attention, Rob's awareness expanded to fully absorb his surroundings. The East Observation Chamber was clearly designed for long-term occupation. Beyond the equipment banks stood a small living area with bunks built into the wall, a compact food preparation space, even a rudimentary bathroom facility with chemical toilet and shower. Most intriguing was the nature of the monitoring equipment itself. Rob had expected weather instrumentation, given the automated radio transmissions, but much of the technology appeared designed for underwater observation rather than atmospheric monitoring. Sonar displays, depth gauges, water temperature monitors, equipment for analyzing oceanic samples. This facility had been built to observe something beneath the waves, not above them. Rob's gaze fixed on a logbook lying open on the central console, its pages yellowed but preserved in the controlled environment intact. The final entry, dated August 2nd, 1985, stopped mid-sentence. Sullivan and I confronted Reynolds today. He threatened our families. If anything happens to me, whoever reads this needs to know. Reynolds isn't who they think. Project Seagull isn't about monitoring Soviet submarines. It's about what they found on the seafloor. The coordinates in my personal computer will lead to The handwriting was immediately familiar. The same distinctive script that had filled the margins of Rob's childhood fishing lessons. The same precise lettering that had labeled his first tackle box. Benjamin Harmon's handwriting, preserved like a time capsule in this underground chamber. His father had been here, had worked on this classified project, had discovered something that ultimately led to his death. Rob sank onto a nearby chair, his injured arm throbbing despite the medication, his mind struggling to process this connection across decades. Whatever his father had uncovered had been significant enough for Reynolds to eliminate him, to disguise his death as a fishing accident, to continue searching for evidence 40 years later. The room tilted sideways as fever and exhaustion reclaimed Rob's consciousness. As darkness closed around his vision, his last thought was of Emma. Her scientific mind would have loved discovering this hidden facility, would have immediately understood the equipment's purpose in ways he was still struggling to grasp. He had promised to attend her science fair. How many days had passed since then? Was she still waiting, still believing her father would return? The darkness claimed him completely as Rob collapsed across the console, the antibiotics beginning their work against the infection even as his consciousness retreated. In this underground chamber, surrounded by his father's legacy and the answers to questions he hadn't known to ask, Robert Harmon surrendered temporarily to healing sleep on day 57 of his island imprisonment. Consciousness returned to Rob in fragments. First the steady hum of equipment, then the cool metal surface beneath his cheek. Finally, the dim emergency lighting casting red-tinged shadows across unfamiliar consoles. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't place himself. Not on the Catherine, not in his Portland apartment, certainly not in his improvised island shelter. Memory crystallized slowly. The eastern wall, the key, the hidden door. Project Seagull, his father's handwriting in the logbook. Pain radiated from his left arm, though noticeably duller than before. Rob raised the limb carefully, examining the wound beneath the now stained bandage. The angry red streaks had receded slightly, the swelling decreased. The military-grade antibiotics were working. He checked his watch. He'd been unconscious nearly 18 hours, the longest continuous rest since washing ashore 58 days earlier. The underground chamber demanded proper exploration now that immediate survival wasn't consuming all his faculties. Rob leveraged himself upright, fighting momentary dizziness as he surveyed his surroundings more thoroughly. The East Observation Chamber's layout became clearer. A central monitoring area ringed by specialized equipment stations, living quarters in a recessed alcove, storage units along the western wall. Everything reflected military efficiency, designed for maximum functionality in minimal space. Rob's first priority remained hydration. He located the water system, a sophisticated recycling and purification setup connected to a larger reservoir elsewhere in the facility. The tap in the small sink produced clear water after a momentary sputter of sediment. Rob drank deeply, the clean liquid a shocking luxury after weeks of brackish puddles and squeezed cactus pulp. His body absorbed the hydration with almost painful gratitude. The food stores proved equally miraculous. Specialized military rations designed for extreme long-term storage occupied an entire cabinet. Many packages had degraded or spoiled over the decades, but several remained intact. Preserved meals that, while unappetizing in appearance and texture, delivered essential nutrients his depleted body desperately needed. Rob consumed a beef stew packet slowly, allowing his contracted stomach to adjust to proper sustenance. With immediate needs addressed, Rob turned to the central console in its abandoned logbook. Benjamin Harmon's final entry remained incomplete, cut off mid-revelation. Rob carefully turned back through the pages, seeking context for his father's cryptic final words. The logbook chronicled daily operations stretching back to 1983, with multiple handwritings indicating rotating personnel. His father's entries began in September 1984, documenting routine maintenance, weather conditions, and increasingly frequent references to acoustic anomalies and submerged target tracking. Benjamin had apparently joined the project as a communications technician, leveraging skills developed during his naval service. A June 1985 entry caught Rob's attention. New directive from Command today, Reynolds and team arriving next week for direct observation of the anomaly. Sullivan, concerned about increased activity without proper containment protocols, requested additional security measures but was denied. Sullivan, the same Sullivan who had warned Rob about the storm. The timing aligned. Fine. Captain Ed would have been in his early 30s during Project Seagull, still an active naval officer before his transition to commercial fishing. The connection sent electricity through Rob's veins. Ed knew, had always known, had perhaps been watching over Rob all these years because of what had happened to his father. Rob continued through the logbook, finding increasingly disturbed entries as July 1985 progressed. Reynolds' team conducted their first deep observation today. Equipment returned with unusual data patterns. R insists on personally analyzing all findings before transmission to Naval Command. Johnson reported unusual equipment behavior in Lab B. Instruments showing electromagnetic fluctuations without clear source. Lab accident today. J hospitalized with severe burns. Reynolds claiming equipment malfunction. But I inspected those systems myself yesterday. Everything was within parameters. The entries grew more agitated, more suspicious, culminating in the final incomplete warning. Whatever Benjamin Harmon had discovered about Reynolds and Project Seagull, it had likely cost him his life. Rob set the logbook aside and began systematically examining the facility's computer systems. Most terminals remained in standby mode, their 1980s technology primitive but ingeniously designed for longevity. The main system activated with a series of mechanical clicks and electronic tones, its monochrome display requesting authentication Rob couldn't provide. A secondary terminal proved more accessible, running diagnostics on the station's life support and power systems. The report confirmed what the radio transmission had indicated. The facility operated on a combination of geothermal energy tapped from the island's volcanic nature and supplementary solar panels disguised within the island's topography. Both systems had degraded over decades without maintenance, currently operating at roughly 30% efficiency, enough to maintain basic functions but steadily declining. More interesting was the communications array status. The automated radio transmission operated on a closed system, broadcasting pre-recorded messages updated with current sensor data. But the facility also housed more sophisticated communications equipment designed for secure military channels. Equipment currently offline, but potentially repairable. Rob's mechanical expertise from years maintaining fishing vessels translated surprisingly well to the station's systems. The technology might be older, but the principles remain similar. Power distribution, signal processing, transmission amplification. With careful study of the technical manuals stored nearby, he might restore partial functionality. A thorough exploration of the storage areas yielded additional treasures. Clean clothing, military issue, decades out of style but blessedly intact. More medical supplies, basic hygiene items. Rob allowed himself the profound luxury of a chemical shower, the specialized system using minimal water with maximum cleaning efficiency. The transformation was psychological as much as physical. Washing away weeks of grime restored some essential sense of humanity the island had steadily eroded. Clean, fed, hydrated, and medicated, Rob's mind functioned with clarity that had become foreign during his survival ordeal. He returned to the main console, examining the facility maps posted on adjacent walls. The East Observation Chamber represented just one section of a larger installation. Additional chambers extended deeper into the island. Storage areas, power plant, and intriguingly, a specimen analysis laboratory. Most compelling was a secondary access tunnel labeled Emergency Egress B, leading to an exit on the island's southern face, potentially offering a route that avoided the territorial seal colony entirely. The map indicated a concealed hatch approximately 400 meters from Rob's original shelter, invisible to his previous explorations. Rob's next discovery sent ice through his veins despite the chamber's regulated temperature. A locked cabinet labeled Classified Materials had partially opened during decades of subtle seismic activity, revealing glimpses of its contents. Using tools from the maintenance kit, Rob carefully bypassed the damaged lock mechanism. Inside lay dozens of photographs, reports, and film canisters, all bearing top-secret designations in Project Seagull headers. The photographs showed various underwater images captured at extreme depths, most indistinct or heavily degraded except for one clear shot that defied explanation. The image showed what appeared to be a geometric structure on the ocean floor, perfectly straight lines and precise angles that nature simply didn't create at random. Adjacent to this apparent structure lay an object approximately 20 feet long, its composition unclear, but its shape unmistakably artificial. The accompanying report, heavily redacted even in this classified context, referenced non-terrestrial material composition and technology beyond current scientific understanding. The document detailed recovery operations in early 1983, with Project Seagull established specifically to monitor the site after partial extraction of materials. Reynolds appeared prominently in later documentation, initially as a junior naval intelligence officer assigned to analyze recovered materials, later as the project's civilian liaison when certain aspects were compartmentalized away from regular military oversight. The most recent documents detailed the project's official decommissioning in 1985 following containment concerns and personnel security incidents. The truth crystallized with devastating clarity. Project Seagull had discovered something in the deep Atlantic, something not built by human hands. The military had extracted portions for study while maintaining this observation post to monitor the site. Reynolds had apparently seen opportunity in the discovery, leading to conflict with Benjamin Harmon and Edward Sullivan when they questioned his methods or intentions. Rob's father hadn't died in a fishing accident. He'd been eliminated because he threatened to expose whatever Reynolds had done. Some ethical breach or perhaps private exploitation of the discovered technology. The accident had been engineered to silence him, with Reynolds continuing his obsession with the discovery for decades afterward. The revelation landed like physical impact. Rob staggered to the nearest chair, photographs clutched in white-knuckled hands. His entire understanding of his father's death, of his own family history, underwent violent reconstruction. Benjamin Harmon hadn't been merely a fisherman who died at sea, but a whistleblower silenced before he could reveal critical information. And now Rob possessed that same dangerous knowledge, stranded on the very island where it all began, with Reynolds clearly still invested enough to threaten anyone connecting him to Project Seagull. When Rob returned to civilization, he would become an immediate target unless he gathered sufficient evidence to protect himself. The communications array became his lifeline. Rob devoted the next 3 days to studying the system schematics, understanding its components, and assessing repair possibilities. The primary transmitter had failed decades ago, but the secondary emergency system remained potentially salvageable. Its limited range would require precisely timed transmission to vessels or aircraft already near the island. But even that slim chance exceeded anything he'd had before discovering the facility. While the antibiotics battled his infection, Rob divided his time between restoring communications equipment, studying Project Seagull documentation, and carefully cataloging evidence of Reynolds' involvement. The station's resources, particularly clean water and proper nutrition, accelerated his physical recovery remarkably. By the fourth day underground, Rob had regained enough strength to begin assembling a functional transmission system from salvaged components. An unexpected breakthrough came on the fifth day, when Rob discovered the station's receiving capabilities remained partially operational. By reconfiguring power distribution to prioritize these circuits, he managed to detect distant radio traffic, mostly commercial shipping and aviation communications, but occasionally fragments of Coast Guard transmissions. The ability to monitor outside communications without yet establishing two-way contact created its own psychological torment. Rob heard tantalizing fragments of normalcy, weather reports, shipping coordinates, routine exchanges between vessels, without any means to interject his own desperate situation. The facility had become simultaneously salvation and prison, its concrete walls and electronic systems extending his survival while emphasizing his isolation. On day 65, Rob completed repairs on the secondary transmitter. The system wouldn't match its original capabilities, but calculations suggested it could broadcast emergency signals approximately 100 nautical miles under ideal conditions, far enough to reach shipping lanes or Coast Guard patrols. The transmission would rapidly drain the facility's dwindling power reserves, however, making each attempt a precious resource to be used strategically. Rob recorded a concise emergency message. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Robert Harmon, captain of fishing vessel Maria Catherine, shipwrecked on uncharted island at coordinates 41.25 north, 67.42 west. Require immediate assistance. Repeat. Mayday, Mayday. He programmed the system to broadcast this message at 6-hour intervals across standard emergency frequencies. Each transmission would last 60 seconds before automatically terminating to conserve power. The arrangement balanced battery preservation against maximum potential for interception by passing vessels. With communications established as effectively as possible, Rob turned his attention to topside operations. Using the facility map as guide, he located the concealed southern exit and cautiously emerged onto the island surface for the first time in nearly a week. The landscape appeared simultaneously familiar and strange after his underground confinement. The volcanic rock harsher under direct sunlight, the ocean vaster and more intimidating than memory had preserved. Rob constructed visual distress signals at strategic points around the island. Stacked stones forming unmistakable SOS patterns visible from air, reflective metal salvaged from storage areas positioned to catch sunlight, signal fires prepared for rapid lighting if aircraft or vessels approached. The activities reconnected him to his survival mindset while leveraging the station's resources to maximize rescue potential. The southern exit provided blessed freedom from the SEAL colony's territorial aggression. Rob established a secondary shelter near this access point, allowing him to divide time between the island surface and the underground facility. The arrangement offered both the benefits of Project Seagull's resources and essential connection to open sky and sea, balancing physical needs against psychological necessities. On night 70, Rob's receiving equipment detected a Coast Guard transmission clearer than any previous interception. A patrol vessel reported position approximately 120 miles northeast of Barren Rock, well beyond his transmitter's range, but following a course that might bring them within signal distance within 24 hours. Rob prepared for potential contact, gathering essential evidence and planning his transmission strategy to maximize impact from minimal connection time. The Coast Guard vessel's trajectory changed before reaching transmission range, however, veering northwest toward the mainland without ever detecting Rob's island. The disappointment crushed with physical force, hope flaring and extinguishing in rapid succession. Rob reminded himself that each passing day increased the statistical likelihood of successful contact, more transmissions broadcast, more vessels potentially passing within range, more opportunities for the mathematical probabilities to align in his favor. Day 75 brought an unexpected development that transformed Rob's understanding of the facility. While examining the primary computer system, he discovered an access protocol call that bypassed standard authentication by instead requiring specific answers to 3 questions. A backdoor apparently created by someone with administrator privileges. The terminal prompt read, "Harmon Emergency Access Sequence," followed by, "What was your son's first catch? Species. Where did Catherine say yes? Location. Emma's favorite shell? Type." Rob stared at the screen, mind racing. These weren't standard security questions. They were personal details about his family that only Benjamin Harmon could have known and implemented. His father had created this backdoor specifically for him, anticipating a scenario where Rob might someday need access to the system. With trembling fingers, Rob entered the answers. Mackerel, his first successful catch at age 7, proudly documented in family photos. Pemaquid Point, where his father had proposed to his mother during a lighthouse visit. And scallop, the very shell Emma had given him for luck before his final voyage. The screen flashed briefly before displaying access granted, B. Harmon protocol activated, followed by a directory of previously inaccessible files. Benjamin had left digital breadcrumbs, personal logs separate from the official records, coordinates of the underwater discovery site, and most critically, evidence documenting Reynolds' actions in the weeks before the project's abrupt termination. The personal logs revealed Benjamin's growing alarm as Reynolds had moved from official oversight to personal exploitation. The naval officer had apparently recognized the potential value of the discovered materials and technology, orchestrating the project's official decommissioning while maintaining private access to key findings and samples. When Benjamin and Sullivan threatened to report irregularities to Naval Command, Reynolds had arranged the accident that claimed Benjamin's life. while Sullivan had been forcibly discharged with his credibility deliberately undermined. Most disturbing was Benjamin's documentation of the discovered materials themselves. The technology recovered from the ocean floor demonstrated molecular configurations and energy generation capabilities beyond anything in human development. Technology that, in Reynolds' own recorded words, will revolutionize military applications and create trillions in commercial potential for whoever controls it. Reynolds hadn't been pursuing abstract knowledge or historical curiosity in his decades-long obsession with Project Seagull. He sought specific coordinates, recovery methods, and composition analysis that would allow him to exploit the discovery for immense personal gain. Information Benjamin had deliberately hidden before his elimination. The knowledge settled like lead in Rob's stomach. His father's hidden files represented something beyond personal vindication. They contained information potentially disruptive to national security and global technology development if weaponized by someone with Reynolds' resources and apparent lack of ethical constraints. The stakes extended far beyond Rob's personal survival or even justice for his father's murder. Day 82 brought another crushing disappointment. Rob spotted a vessel on the horizon, not a Coast Guard patrol, but a small private yacht. He immediately activated his emergency protocols, building signal fires and positioning himself at the highest accessible point with salvaged reflective metal to catch the sun's rays. The ship clearly altered course toward the island, raising Rob's hopes to nearly unbearable heights. As the vessel approached, its profile became horrifyingly familiar. The sleek lines of Reynolds' yacht Prometheus, unmistakable even at distance. Rob's elation transformed instantly to tactical calculation. Reynolds had somehow detected the island's automated transmissions or perhaps tracked energy signatures from the reactivated facility. Either way, his arrival represented threat rather than rescue. Rob retreated to the underground facility, securing both entrances and gathering essential documentation. If Reynolds located either access point, Rob would need both defensive options and evacuation plans. He transferred his father's most crucial evidence to waterproof containers, creating multiple caches both within the facility and at hidden points around the island, insurance against any single point of discovery or confiscation. Through cautious observation using the station's periscope system, Rob watched Reynolds and four armed men systematically search the island over several hours. They appeared to have sophisticated detection equipment that led them to investigate areas near both entrance points, though the camouflaged access hatches apparently remained undiscovered. Reynolds' team seemed particularly interested in the automated weather antenna concealed among natural rock formations, the source of the station's decades-long transmission capacity. The search party departed without breaching the facility, but their presence confirmed Rob's fears. Reynolds maintained active interest in Project Seagull and would eliminate any witness to his connection with it. The encounter transformed Rob's rescue calculations. Any transmission that reached Reynolds before legitimate authorities might prove fatal rather than salvational. Day 85 brought a significant boost to Rob's transmission capabilities. By reconfiguring components from secondary systems and incorporating parts from the station's backup generator, he managed to approximately double the emergency transmitter's range. The modification required sacrificing life support redundancies and further depleting power reserves. But the expanded broadcast radius substantially increased contact probability with passing vessels. The solution created its own dilemma, however. Each transmission now drained power at an accelerated rate, forcing Rob to reduce broadcast frequency to preserve facility functionality. He redesigned his transmission schedule to coincide with peak shipping traffic periods and Coast Guard patrol patterns gleaned from intercepted communications, maximizing efficiency rather than frequency. On night 90, Rob intercepted the clearest Coast Guard transmission yet, a patrol vessel reporting position just 70 miles southeast, well within his enhanced transmission range. He immediately activated his emergency broadcast, interrupting his scheduled conservation cycle to capitalize on this critical opportunity. For excruciatingly long minutes, Rob's transmission received no acknowledgement. He repeated the emergency call 3 times before battery concerns forced termination. Just as he prepared to power down the system, a response crackled through the receiver. Unknown station broadcasting Mayday. This is United States Coast Guard Cutter Eagle. Your transmission was partially received but broken. Please identify and provide position again. Over. The sound of another human voice addressing him directly, the first such contact in 90 days, nearly overwhelmed Rob's composure. He steadied himself and transmitted again, carefully enunciating each word. Coast Guard Cutter Eagle. This is Robert Harmon, captain of fishing vessel Maria Catherine out of Portland, Maine. Shipwrecked approximately 90 days ago on uncharted island at coordinates 41:25 north, 6742 west. Require immediate assistance. One survivor. Repeat, one survivor requiring immediate evacuation. The response came faster this time. Station claiming to be Robert Harmon, we copy your transmission. Be advised, Captain Harmon and vessel Maria Catherine were reported lost at sea with all hands approximately 12 weeks ago. Require verification of identity. Over. Rob processed this information with conflicting emotions. Grief that Emma and others had believed him dead for months. Relief that at least someone had noted his disappearance rather than simply forgetting his existence. He transmitted again. Eagle, this is Robert Harmon. Verification, Maine fishing license, MF73521. Vessel registration, ME14576, CT. Daughter, Emma Catherine Harmon, age 9. Last departed Portland Harbor, May 12th for George's Bank. Can verify any personal details required. Please respond. The ensuing silence stretched unbearably before the reply arrived. Robert Harmon, this is Eagle. We have confirmed your license and registration details. Your coordinates place you on what navigational charts show as open ocean. Are you on a vessel or physical landmass? Over. Rob explained his situation concisely, the island's unmarked nature, the storm and shipwreck, his survival methods, the discovery of the abandoned facility. He omitted references to Project Seagull's classified aspects, focusing solely on survival and rescue requirements. The Coast Guard officer's tone shifted from procedural to urgently professional. Robert Harmon, we are adjusting course to your reported coordinates. Estimated arrival time approximately 6 hours. Prepare visual signals for helicopter approach. We will maintain periodic radio contact. Eagle out. 6 hours. After 90 days of isolation, just 6 more hours until human contact, medical attention, return to civilization. The timeline seems simultaneously impossibly distant and shockingly immediate. Rob immediately began final preparations, gathering essential evidence, placing backup documentation in waterproof containers at separate locations, preparing the helicopter landing zone he'd established atop the island's southern plateau. As Rob worked, his receiver intercepted another transmission, not from the Coast Guard, but between 2 civilian vessels. Target location confirmed, intercept before Coast Guard arrival. Primary objective is facility access and containment. Secondary objective is elimination of witness. Reynolds wants no official documentation of the island or its contents. Ice formed in Rob's veins as he recognized the voice. The same man who had pursued his fishing boat before the storm, one of Reynolds' security personnel. They had been monitoring Coast Guard frequencies and now planned to reach the island before official rescue arrived. Rob calculated rapidly. Reynolds' yacht could potentially reach the island in 4 hours from its likely position, giving him a 2-hour window to prepare defenses against armed opponents while preserving evidence of both Project Seagull and Reynolds' criminal activities. The underground facility offered protection, but also confinement. Once inside, he would have no escape routes if Reynolds' team breached the entrances. Strategic thinking replaced panic. Rob established multiple fallback positions across the island, each supplied with essential survival equipment and documentation. He modified the facility's security systems, creating false access points that would trigger alarms while concealing his actual position. Most critically, he prepared an emergency transmission package containing all essential evidence, set to broadcast to multiple military and civilian frequencies if manually triggered. 4 hours later, Rob spotted the Prometheus approaching from the northeast, sleeker and faster than the Coast Guard cutter, still beyond the horizon. As the yacht anchored offshore, Rob positioned himself in a concealed observation point with clear sight lines to both the northern and southern access points. 4 armed men accompanied Reynolds onto the island, their movements betraying military training rather than civilian security backgrounds. The team split into pairs, methodically sweeping the island with electronic detection equipment. Reynolds himself remained with one guard at the southern landing point, coordinating the search teams via radio. From his elevated position, Rob could hear fragments of their communication, references to the facility entrance and Harmon's position, confirming they knew far more about the island than casual observation could provide. When the nearest search team approached his observation position, Rob retreated silently toward the northern section, leading them away from both facility entrances while maintaining his freedom of movement. The stratagem worked initially, with Reynolds repositioning his teams to follow the detected movement, but the island's limited size made prolonged evasion impossible. 50 minutes before the Coast Guard's estimated arrival, one team discovered the camouflaged northern entrance. Rob, observing from behind a volcanic outcropping, watched them attempt to breach the hatch using specialized equipment. The facility's aging but ingenious security measures resisted their efforts temporarily, but Reynolds' team clearly possessed technical expertise specific to the installation's design. As the northern team worked on the hatch, Reynolds and his remaining security personnel converged on the location. Rob seized this opportunity to circle back toward the southern plateau, where the Coast Guard helicopter would likely approach. If he could maintain his position there, visible to incoming rescuers while Reynolds remained occupied with the facility breach, he might survive long enough for official intervention. The strategy collapsed when one security operative broke from the northern group, apparently tasked with securing the helicopter landing zone. Rob found himself trapped between advancing threats, his options narrowing to direct confrontation. He positioned himself behind elevated rocks near the southern plateau, calculating angles and timing as the operative methodically swept the area. When the man passed within arm's reach of Rob's position, necessity overcame hesitation. Rob launched himself at the armed operative, the element of surprise providing momentary advantage. The ensuing struggle was brief but vicious, Rob's desperation against trained technique. A blow to Rob's healing arm sent white-hot pain through his body, but the distraction created opening for a counterstrike that rendered the operative unconscious. Rob secured the man's weapon and communication device, immediately hearing Reynolds' voice through the radio. "Sierra 2, report status, landing zone secure." When no response came, Reynolds' tone hardened. "All units converge on southern plateau. Possible contact." With Reynolds and at least two remaining security personnel now advancing toward his position, Rob faced impossible odds in direct confrontation. Instead, he activated the emergency transmission package, broadcasting the documented evidence of Reynolds' crimes to multiple frequencies, including the approaching Coast Guard vessel. The transmission would continue automatically even if Rob himself was captured or killed. As footsteps approached his position, Rob retreated toward the edge of the plateau, where sheer cliffs dropped to the ocean below. Reynolds emerged from the volcanic formations, flanked by his remaining security personnel, their weapons raised. Reynolds' expression mixed triumph with cold calculation as he recognized Rob. All this effort to find a simple fisherman. Your father had the same stubborn streak, never knowing when a situation was beyond his control. The evidence is buried, the facility will be stripped and collapsed, and your tragic death while awaiting rescue will close the final chapter. No one will believe wild stories about government conspiracies from a traumatized castaway. Rob raised his appropriated weapon, forcing Reynolds to hesitate momentarily. The situation's futility remained clear. Even if Rob managed to eliminate Reynolds, the security personnel would ensure mutual destruction. But delay served Rob's purposes, each minute bringing the Coast Guard closer to their position. Reynolds seemed to read this calculation in Rob's expression. "Time won't save you, Harmon. Even if your transmission reached someone, it's just the rambling of a shipwrecked victim suffering from hallucinations and trauma. My resources can handle any inconvenient questions." His hand shifted slightly toward his sidearm. "Your father couldn't stop me 40 years ago. What makes you think you'll succeed where he failed?" The distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors emerged from beyond the island's southern exposure, distance difficult to gauge but clearly approaching. Reynolds' expression tightened as he recognized the sound's implications. His security team glanced upward instinctively, creating momentary distraction. Rob seized the opportunity, lunging laterally rather than directly engaging. His movement carried him behind a rock formation as gunfire erupted, bullets impacting Stone inches from his position. He circled the formation, staying low, emerging on the opposite side as the helicopter's sound intensified dramatically. The Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk appeared above the plateau, its downdraft creating swirling clouds of volcanic dust. Reynolds and his team momentarily shielded their eyes from the debris, creating the opening Rob needed to break cover and sprint toward the approaching aircraft. Gunfire resumed almost immediately, rounds impacting around Rob's feet as he zigzagged toward salvation. From the helicopter's open side door, a Coast Guard marksman returned suppressing fire, forcing Reynolds' team to seek cover. The aircraft descended rapidly to hover approximately 10 feet above the plateau surface, a rescue swimmer dropping to guide Rob aboard. As Rob reached the rescuer, a final shot rang out, Reynolds taking direct aim despite the suppressing fire. Pain blossomed in Rob's side as the bullet struck, not immediately debilitating but sending him stumbling into the Coast Guardsman's grasp. The trained rescuer maintained his hold, signaling immediate extraction as he secured Rob to the rescue harness. The ascent into the helicopter cabin passed in a blur of pain and disorientation. Medical personnel immediately attended to Rob's gunshot wound as the aircraft banked sharply away from the island. Through the open door, Rob glimpsed Reynolds watching from the plateau, his expression promising this confrontation remained unfinished, despite the momentary retreat. Inside the cabin, Rob fought to maintain consciousness as medics stabilized his condition. The Coast Guard officer commanding the rescue operation leaned close, his expression professional but compassionate. "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Commander Davies. We've received your transmission evidence and secured the data. Naval intelligence has been notified regarding the coordinates and classified material. We have additional information you should know." Before the officer could continue, a smaller figure pushed past him, throwing herself at Rob with such force that even the medics couldn't intercept. Emma's arms wrapped around his neck, her tears soaking his shirt as her voice broke through the helicopter's mechanical noise. "I knew you were alive. I told them you wouldn't leave me. I showed them with science where to look." Behind Emma stood Captain Edward Sullivan, his weathered face displaying emotions too complex for simple categorization. The older man's hand rested on Emma's shoulder as his eyes met Rob's. "Your daughter's ocean current models identified the most likely location for survival based on the Catherine's last known position. Navy dismissed it as childish fantasy, but the Coast Guard finally listened. Your father would be proud of both of you." As the helicopter gained altitude and speed, banking toward the mainland and medical facilities, Rob held his daughter with his uninjured arm. Through the cabin window, barren rock receded into the vastness of the Atlantic, its secrets partially exposed but still largely contained beneath volcanic stone and military classification. Reynolds remained free for now, but the transmitted evidence would ensure investigations that even his resources couldn't entirely suppress. The truth about Project Seagull, about Benjamin Harmon's death, about whatever lay beneath the ocean floor near those coordinates, all had begun their inevitable journey into official scrutiny. Justice might move with bureaucratic caution, but it would advance nevertheless, propelled by documentation too substantial for casual dismissal. Emma's small voice pulled Rob's attention from these larger considerations. "You kept your promise about the science fair, Dad. You said wild horses couldn't keep you away." Her hands clutched something familiar, the scallop shell she'd given him for luck, recovered from his survival pack by the medical team. "I knew this would bring you back." Rob's consciousness began fading as medication took effect, pain subsiding into comfortable numbness. The last sensations before darkness claimed him were Emma's hand in his and Sullivan's gruff voice providing flight coordinates to the mainland. 97 days after the Catherine slipped beneath Atlantic waves, Robert Harmon was going home, carrying truth and evidence that would ensure Victor Reynolds finally answered for decades of buried crimes. On a personal level, the deepest victory wasn't survival against impossible odds, wasn't even the prospect of justice for his father. As consciousness slipped away with Emma's tearful smile, the last image registered, Rob recognized the true triumph, keeping his promise to return, maintaining the connection between father and daughter that Reynolds had tried to sever just as he'd severed Benjamin from his son decades earlier. Some bonds prove stronger than storms, stronger than isolation, stronger than the machinations of powerful men who believed wealth and influence could overcome all opposition. In that moment between wakefulness and healing darkness, Rob found perfect clarity about what mattered most. Not revenge, not vindication, but the continuation of family connections across time, weathering whatever storms might come. His father had created backdoor access specifically for him, had left breadcrumbs across decades, had believed Rob would someday find his way to the truth. That faith, that connection across time and death itself, would sustain him through whatever challenges recovery and justice might require. The Catherine was gone, but the legacy it represented, 4 generations of harm and resilience against all the Atlantic could unleash, remained unbroken. As medical sedation claimed final consciousness, Rob's last thought resonated with unexpected peace. "I'm coming home, Dad. I found what you left for me. Now I'll make sure the world knows what it means."